Where's yours, sir?
Perfect. Started the clock. Good morning. On behalf of the Community-Based Research Center, thank you for taking up this important issue and inviting us to participate. To provide context for my remarks, in addition to my role at the CBRC, I'm also steering committee co-chair of Alberta's Sexually Transmitted and Bloodborne Infection Strategy, as well as the founder of the EMHC, grassroots health organization run by and for sexual and gender minority communities in Edmonton, Alberta. In preparation for today's meeting, I had the privilege of reviewing the remarks made by my esteemed colleagues and heard what was shared earlier. And while I can think a little highly of myself sometimes, I'm not sure I can recount the background and the core facts of the matter much better than they have already. So I'll save us all a little bit of time and move past that to what I think we can do about it. And here, too, my colleagues have provided the committee with fairly consistent direction. Namely, while we recognize the Federal Attorney General's directive on limiting HIV non-disclosure prosecutions as a very important step in the right direction, we must also recognize the limits of its reach and impact. Therefore, as echoed by multiple witnesses before the committee and nearly 200 organizations across this country who've all endorsed the community consensus statement to end unjust HIV criminalization, the only way we believe that we can effectively address this issue at a national level is through the reform of the criminal code. And while there remain some questions as to exactly what that might look like, there's a very strong consensus shared by all the witnesses before you today that it must include the removal of HIV non-disclosure cases from the realm of sexual assault law. And so if we have the core facts of the matter, oh yes.
Translation's having a trouble with the speed.
The Newfie accent? Oh, sorry.
No, not at all.
I was born and raised.
Just the speed. No, we're not getting to Simpsons stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind just slowing
down a little bit.
Yeah.
I will do that. Okay. So if we have a general consensus about what we can do about this matter, the question then shifts to why it's important that we must act. And I'd like to provide the committee with two reasons today. First, as you've heard, a consensus has emerged, endorsed by the US CDC and our own Minister of Health, that when someone living with HIV has and maintains an undetectable viral load, they cannot transmit the virus sexually to others. In other words, undetectable equals untransmittable, you equals you. And while this broad consensus is relatively new, the understanding that treatment as a form of HIV prevention is effective is not. In fact, in 2014, with this understanding, the UN set new global HIV targets known as 90-90-90. In essence, these state that by 2020, 90% of those who are living with HIV will be diagnosed, 90% of those diagnosed will be on treatment, and 90% of those on treatment will have a suppressed or undetectable viral load. If these ambitious goals were met effectively, that would result in 73% of all people living with HIV having a suppressed viral load, setting the stage to end the epidemic as we know it by the year 2030. However, in the most recent publicly available data I could find, the Public Health Agency of Canada estimated that by the year 2016, only 86% of those living with HIV in Canada were diagnosed, only 81% of those diagnosed on treatment, with the one bright spot being that 91% of those on treatment had achieved an undetectable viral load. This resulted in only 63% of people living with HIV being virally suppressed, a full 10% off our 2020 target. While disconcerting, it's not without a bright light. We see that people living with HIV in Canada, when linked to effective HIV treatment, do a pretty good job of taking their medication as prescribed and achieving an undetectable viral load, benefiting their health, the health of the people they care about, and the health of the greater public. Where we're falling behind, then, is in the health system and the two targets that it is most responsible for, namely ensuring that people have access to safe and accessible screening options, and two, ensuring that those who are diagnosed are linked to care and treatment options that work for them. So one would think, knowing this, that we as a country would take a unified, coordinated approach to dealing with the situation. Well, one would think. In the previous session, William Flanagan shared a Canadian study published in 2018 which demonstrated that the criminalization of non-disclosure decreased the likelihood of gay and bisexual men getting tested. This is a population, I will remind the committee, which makes up about half of all new HIV infections each year. So there goes your first 90. Other colleagues spoke to concerns HIV-positive patients had, sharing important information with healthcare providers about their treatment out of fear that these intimate details could be used against them in criminal proceedings, inhibiting their ability to access treatment options that work for them. There goes your second 90. So why, as the health system struggles to cross the finish line to end Canada's HIV epidemic, is the justice system cutting it off at the knees? Sorry, you cannot with the one hand signal that you equals you, write hashtag no HIV stigma on one's Twitter, hug the 90-90-90 targets, while with the other uphold a scenario where the criminal law's application is so disproportionate and extreme that you are adding HIV stigma at a faster rate than you can remove it. It is contradictory and it is self-defeating. No wonder people are confused. So I asked this committee what is more just, committing to proven and widely endorsed public health strategies that can effectively end the HIV epidemic and decrease the vulnerability of all Canadians to HIV infection, or upholding a scenario where the law is applied so vaguely and unevenly that people living with HIV who are actually doing what they can to prevent transmission are unfairly and cruelly targeted as part of some crusade to which I can assign no benefit. I believe that we do need to answer this question because I do not believe that it can be both. In concluding, I'd like to offer one final reason I believe we should act. In addition to my work in this field, I am also a person who's living with HIV, have been for the past 8 years. And there's been a lot of talk before this committee of people living with HIV often being vulnerable or marginalized. And yes, HIV and the criminalization of non-disclosure do disproportionately impact those who are vulnerable, and it is our duty to ensure they are protected and can lead lives free of stigma and discrimination. But more than vulnerability, the qualities that strike me most when thinking of people living with HIV are resilience, courage, and innovation. A people as diverse as one could imagine, united by a common thread which penetrated all of our lives and made us one, who in the face of what appeared to be certain death, mobilized and organized, participated in and led vital research, developed policy and pioneered best practice, all while many in power turned a blind eye to their needs. They did all of this and more so that we could live. And we do. Excuse me. Nearly 70,000 people in this country today will live and not die because of their sacrifice. And as if that were not enough, the impacts of their efforts extend far beyond those living with HIV. Innovative models and crucial infrastructure pioneered and built by those living with HIV in this country have been successfully adopted and implemented by those working in the fields of sexual and gender minority rights, hepatitis C, the opioid response, and more. Canadian society has been permanently and positively altered by the decades of contributions those living with HIV have made to this country. So with this in mind, as I sat to prepare these remarks and reviewed the testimony from the previous session, hearing of the horrific experiences, those whose lives have been destroyed by the application of the law, I found myself to be gravely disappointed, angry even, of how little value are we, some of us sitting at this table, and our contributions to this country for such horrible things to knowingly continue to stand. Make no mistake, it is a deep disrespect to our collective legacy and contribution to this country to allow this vague, unevenly applied, and unnecessarily cruel application of the law to continue unaddressed. But fortunately for this committee, it does not need to be. Throughout this study, many of us, people living with HIV, community-based organizations, experts in law and public health, have offered our support in helping this committee take something that's been wrong for so long and to finally make it right. And for the benefit of those living with HIV in this country and everybody else, I do hope you'll take us up on that offer.